is in like full control. I would hope she's in full control, but I don't know because I'm hearing some stories about donors that are pushing things. I'm hearing about the pressure that's even happening with planning this event.
There's the other thing. They said that he took it apart and then put it back together again. Shut up. Do you know how much time it would take to do that if you were highly skilled?
To disassemble a gun.
To disassemble a rifle so that you can get it in a backpack. And by the way, not going to fit.
Not going to fit in a backpack.
And then somehow or another reconnects it once he gets off the roof? What? Like, you're telling me that this kid who's not military trained, this guy, first of all, how did he get to the roof? How come nobody was looking? How come nobody was like, there's a direct line of sight between where he's sitting and those roofs? You guys didn't check? You don't have a drone? Like, that's insane. So he's on the roof, he shoots, he jumps from the roof. He jumps down 14 feet, jumps off of the roof and lands, whether or not he's even the guy who shot him. Maybe he thought he was going to shoot him.
Joe Rogan just cracked the Charlie Kirk case wide open, and nobody was prepared for the direction he went. Nobody expected Rogan to wade into this story. That's the part that genuinely caught everyone off guard. For months, Candace Owens has been standing alone publicly, insisting that the official account of Charlie Kirk's death is riddled with holes, that a deliberate cover-up is operating at the highest levels, that the people responsible are being shielded, that the truth is being systematically buried while the public gets fed a sanitized version of events. And for most of that time, the standard response was to write her off entirely, label her dramatic, call her a conspiracy theorist chasing attention and engagement, dismiss the whole thing as noise. But Joe Rogan just fundamentally changed the temperature of this entire conversation. And he didn't do it softly. He didn't offer a polite, "She raises some interesting questions." He backed Candace directly and without hesitation. He stated publicly that the official story surrounding Charlie Kirk's death on September 10th does not hold together. He said there is far more happening beneath the surface than the public has been told. And he said the real answers may involve people who were significantly closer to Charlie than anyone has been willing to name out loud. When Rogan speaks, the audience listening is measured in the tens of millions. That is simply the reality of his platform. The moment he stepped into this situation, then every person who had been comfortably dismissing Candace as a noisemaker was suddenly forced to stop and reconsider their position. Because Rogan doesn't casually insert himself into active cases involving major political figures on impulse. When he takes a public position on something this serious, it's because he has examined it carefully and concluded it's worth the weight of his platform. So, Mawa, what exactly is he saying? And why does it point somewhere so much darker than most people are ready to go?
And then you say, oh, he assembled it and he reassembled it. Like, okay. If I wish I was a cop, I'd sit in a room like, this story is horseshit. Like, none of these things make any sense to me. It's all part of the plan. If you want people to lose all faith that anyone is going to solve anything, you add a bunch of, if you're going to kill a guy, you add a bunch of other wacky that doesn't make any sense and you spam it out there at the same time. You leave a gun that didn't do it out in the woods. You do a bunch of shit like that.
You have an old man put his out and yell, I did it, I did it.
Yeah, you get some kid who has a boyfriend who's a furry, and you talk to him on Discord. I think he's a furry.
Let's go back to the beginning, because context is everything here, and too many people are working from fragments rather than the full picture. Charlie Kirk was killed on September 10th at Utah Valley University. That is documented fact. I know what is not established. What has been inconsistent and murky from the very first hours is everything surrounding how it happened, who was ultimately responsible, and why the investigation has developed in the way that it has. From the moment the shooting became public, unusual things started happening. The first and most significant was the speed of federal involvement. Local law enforcement was handling the scene the way any agency would in a critical incident situation. And then federal agencies stepped in and absorbed the case with striking speed. Candace Owens was the first person to publicly flag this, pointing out that when federal agencies move that quickly to take control away from local police, it historically signals one of two things. Either the case carries genuine national security implications, or someone with substantial influence has decided they want direct control over what information reaches the public and what gets quietly managed out of the conversation. Candace also flagged something else almost immediately, a suspicious military aircraft that reportedly touched down in Utah shortly before the shooting became public knowledge. At the time, people treated that observation as reactive speculation from someone looking for shadows, but as the investigation continued producing more questions than answers, that early flag started looking considerably less like guesswork and considerably more like someone who had been paying very careful attention to details others were missing. she also made an observation that sounds straightforward until you actually sit with it. If the genuine priority was catching Charlie's killer as rapidly as possible, the obvious move would have been immediate full release of every photograph, every surveillance recording, and every piece of scene footage available. The internet's track record on exactly this kind of crowdsourced identification is well established. It works, and it works fast. But that didn't happen here. The release of information was slow, controlled, and managed with what appeared to be deliberate precision. Candace's position on this was direct. If they had wanted to catch Charlie's killer, they would have immediately publicized all pictures and videos, and the internet would have solved it in minutes. The desire was never there.
Is in full control. I would hope she's in full control, but I don't know because I'm hearing some stories about donors that are pushing things. I'm hearing about the pressure that's even happening with planning this event. And nope, you're right. You got me. I was not invited to speak alongside President Trump and J.D. Vance on the stage with Tucker Carlson at a memorial.
That observation hit very differently once Rogan started publicly confirming that the timeline and official narrative carry serious problems. Now, here is one of the specific details Rogan zeroed in on, something that has been embedded in this story from the beginning without receiving the serious scrutiny it demands. The role of George Zen. The older man who reportedly arrived at the scene loudly announced himself as the shooter, and in doing so created immediate confusion that disrupted the initial law enforcement response at a critical moment. On the surface, someone might frame that as the kind of unpredictable chaos that sometimes surrounds violent incidents. People panic, crowds behave irrationally, extraordinary situations produce strange behavior. But that explanation collapses the moment you look at who George Zen actually is. This is not a man with a clean background who found himself accidentally present at a historic moment. George Zen has a documented history of appearing in situations involving law enforcement confrontations, bomb threats, public disruptions, and incidents connected to significant public events. There is a documented pattern here, a pattern of this specific individual appearing at high-stakes, chaotic moments in ways that stretch ordinary probability well past its breaking point. Rogan's question is the right one. What are the actual statistical odds that this particular individual, with this particular documented history, just happened to be standing in exactly the right location at the exact moment Charlie Kirk was shot? And just happened to take an action that immediately derailed the initial law enforcement response? If that's a coincidence, it's an extraordinarily convenient one. And convenient coincidences in situations like this deserve serious scrutiny, not casual acceptance. Then there is the alleged shooter himself, Tyler Robinson. Rogan raised the possibility that Robinson may not have been the actual architect of what happened, that he may have been deliberately positioned to absorb the consequences of something that was planned and executed at a level far above what the official narrative suggests. That is a significant claim. The fact that a voice with Rogan's reach is making it publicly means this line of investigation is not going to be quietly walked back or ignored into irrelevance.
First of all, there was that one guy who was the decoy. All right, so you got this guy who's an older guy who starts yelling out. Didn't he take his pants down? He took his pants down. This guy was at 9/11. He was at the Boston bombings.
All the hits.
He called in a fake bomb at another place. And then he did this at this thing. Right after, so somehow or another, this guy has the state of mind that the moment someone gets shot, he yells out and says, "I did it,
But here is where the story fundamentally shifts, from the shooting itself to the question of why it may have happened. Because the financial trail running through Turning Point USA in the days immediately preceding Charlie's death is the piece of this entire puzzle that both Candace and Rogan keep returning to, and for reasons that become more compelling the closer you look. 8 days before Charlie was killed, he circulated an internal memo directing Turning Point USA's chief operating officer to launch a comprehensive internal audit. The memo described it as a sweeping initiative aimed at identifying financial inefficiencies, cutting unjustified costs, and conducting serious scrutiny of where the organization's money was actually flowing. He wanted the books opened completely. He wanted full accountability inside the organization he had dedicated his life to building. That alone carries significant weight. But then, former Turning Point USA employees began coming forward following Charlie's death, speaking directly to Candace and describing suspicious financial activity that had apparently been occurring behind the scenes for an extended period. The number these sources are pointing to is genuinely staggering. Claims that the audit Charlie was pushing to launch would have exposed more than $40 million in funds that cannot be properly accounted for. $40 million, unaccounted for, inside the organization Charlie built from the ground up. And the individual most directly positioned to be exposed by that audit, Tyler Bauer. Vine, who ran Turning Point Action, is the same man now claiming that Charlie privately told him he wanted Erika to eventually become president of the United States. The same man who received a presidential pardon in less than 2 months following Charlie's death. The same man who, according to Candace Owens, had an insider operating within TPUSA allegedly feeding information back to her. Rogan's point mirrors exactly what Candace has been saying for months. You cannot examine this situation with any honesty without following the money. And when you follow the money, the trail arrives somewhere that makes the lone gunman random shooting narrative increasingly impossible to accept with a straight face. The financial pressure on Charlie wasn't only coming from inside Turning Point either. It was arriving simultaneously from outside, from the major donors who had been funding the organization and who were growing visibly uncomfortable with the direction Charlie was taking his public positions.
The question is, might be off topic. How did your mom choose Phoenix?
So she chose to move to Phoenix from Ohio because there was more of an opportunity for a female business owner out here. Especially from the standpoint of she was getting involved with the government, so Homeland Security and Department of Defense. And so she had other business partners that were out here that were already in that industry, even one that was a mentor of hers. So it was really convenient to be able to come all together in one place to really have that.
Candace released screenshots from a private group conversation showing Charlie expressing his frustration in direct, unfiltered terms. In those messages, Charlie wrote, "Just lost another huge Jewish donor, $2 million a year because you won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Candace. Jewish donors play into all the stereotypes. I cannot and I will not be bullied like this, leaving me with no choice but to leave the pro-Israel position." Those messages provide a direct, unfiltered window into the pressure environment Charlie was operating inside during his final weeks. He was being squeezed by donors threatening to withdraw major funding unless he adjusted his positions, realigned his associations, and cut specific people from his circles. That is not policy disagreement. That is financial coercion. And Charlie was clearly pushing back against it rather than quietly falling in line. Some of the donors connected to those messages have denied their authenticity, including billionaire Bill Ackman, the same Bill Ackman who reportedly organized a private meeting with Charlie at his Hamptons estate in the weeks before the assassination. According to people who spoke with Charlie following that meeting, he left describing the experience in one very specific word: blackmail. That was the characterization people close to him say he used to describe what happened in that room. Blackmail. Then Candace responded publicly with full force, stating, Charlie Kirk was fighting with some very powerful billionaires that he took money from over things he was discussing. The pressure on him was immense. Over the last 2 weeks, the truth will be revealed. The messages will be leaked, and the movement he built will rise up. She followed that with, more is going to come out. The truth is inevitable. They're lying. These people were deranged enough to put their anger and demands in writing. Sorry, you murdered my friend. You unlocked the Inigo Montoya in me. We're not stopping until we get to the bottom of this. They tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died. This is a fact. Pressure, intimidation, financial threat. Stop lying.
Then there arrived a moment when Charlie felt that the money was disappearing. He felt that, again, according to sources, that the company was burning through cash too quickly. And Charlie set about finding out why and how this was happening.
That is not the language of someone running a media strategy or chasing engagement metrics. And that is someone who believes with complete and total conviction that she knows what happened to her friend, and who has fully committed to making sure it surfaces regardless of who it implicates. Now comes the most uncomfortable layer of this entire story, the one involving the woman publicly positioned as Charlie's grieving widow and the designated guardian of his legacy. There is a detail from Erika's background that has been floating in the conversation without receiving the serious examination it warrants. In a 2020 interview, Erika mentioned that her family relocated to Arizona because her mother had accepted a position working with Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. That is a direct family connection to federal agencies that are now involved in some capacity with the investigation into Charlie's death. That connection doesn't prove anything in isolation, but placed alongside everything else that has emerged, it is precisely the kind of detail that demands a straight answer, rather than being quietly passed over. And then there is the behavioral pattern people have been watching in real time since the shooting. Within less than 2 weeks of Charlie's death, Erika was installed as the new CEO of Turning Point USA. For an organization supposedly navigating profound collective grief and institutional shock, that transition happened with remarkable speed and remarkable smoothness. No extended evaluation period, no interim leadership arrangement while the organization found its footing. Just a clean, lightning-swift handover of total operational control to the widow, who until very recently had been publicly presented as someone whose entire identity existed entirely outside the organization's day-to-day structure. Charlie's estate, reported to be over $12 million, transferred. Turning Point began receiving millions in fresh donations in the immediate aftermath of his death. And Erika, as the newly installed CEO, sat at the center of all of it. People online noticed the velocity of all these transitions. They noticed that the financial infrastructure surrounding Charlie appeared to move into new arrangements with a speed that suggested prior preparation. And they started asking directly whether any of that movement had been anticipated well before September 10th. Then came the public moments that had people analyzing footage frame by frame.
And I see no one will ever replace my husband. No. But I do see some similarities of my husband in JD and Vice President JD Vance. I do.
At Charlie's memorial, when the president offered his condolences to Erika, the interaction generated immediate and extensive online commentary. The physical nature of that embrace struck a significant number of viewers as carrying an energy that felt distinctly unusual for the context and the occasion. People froze the footage, rewound it, and analyzed it in considerable detail. And the widespread reaction wasn't manufactured. The observation that something felt off was shared independently by an enormous number of people. Then came the Turning Point rally where Erika appeared alongside J.D. Vance. The extended physical closeness, the sustained and notably warm eye contact between them generated a wave of commentary that went well beyond casual observation. People weren't simply noting it in passing, they were posting detailed analysis, and in some cases making very specific predictions about the trajectory of that dynamic. Posts circulated suggesting Vance would announce a divorce and pursue a relationship with Erika before the end of 2026, with some going further and speculating about Erika potentially positioning herself as a future First Lady through Vance's political ambitions. None of that is confirmed. None of it constitutes established fact. But the sheer volume and consistency of people independently arriving at nearly identical observations means the optics of those interactions were genuinely and widely striking. And here is what makes all of that more than tabloid speculation. The layer underneath the observation. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are among the most powerful figures in the current political establishment. Where both are individuals that Candace Owens and others have alleged may carry knowledge about what actually happened to Charlie Kirk.
Okay, you're saying something that's actually factually inaccurate,
Right.
according to the narrative. Now, let's be real clear. I don't necessarily think they know what's going on yet. There's a lot of weird going on with Whirly.
I almost texted you when the Charlie Kirk thing happened because my antennas went up about, they showed the photo of that kid, or the guy that they have, the 22-year-old,
Yeah.
whatever. And I was almost going to be like, dude.
This kid had a rifle with a scope. Now, here's where it gets weird. The first images of this rifle with a scope, I swear to God, it looks like he has a composite stock on it. Like it looks like a modern 30-06 rifle.
If that allegation has any foundation whatsoever, and it remains an allegation, then Erika's warm, close, publicly visible relationships with both of these men read in an entirely different light than they would in a straightforward grieving widow scenario. It raises a question that is difficult to dismiss, whether that closeness represents emotional comfort or whether it reflects something with considerably more strategic architecture operating beneath the surface. Now pull back and take in the complete picture. Every single thread Candace Owens identified and raised publicly in the immediate aftermath of Charlie's death. The federal seizure of the case, the controlled suppression of visual evidence, the financial irregularities inside TPUSA, the billionaire donor pressure campaign, the suspicious speed of the post-death power transition, every one of those threads has since produced additional evidence, additional corroboration, or additional sources willing to speak. She was dismissed as reckless. She was mocked. She was called irresponsible for making powerful people uncomfortable with questions they didn't want asked. And now Joe Rogan, one of the most listened to voices in the country, is sitting down and stating publicly that the official story doesn't hold up, that Candace may have been right from the beginning, that the real answers are buried beneath layers of active protection that very powerful people are working very hard to maintain. This is not a minor development. But Rogan does not casually go on record accusing federal agencies and billionaire donors of being complicit in covering up a political assassination. That is not content he produces for engagement or audience growth. When he takes a position like that publicly, it means the evidence he has personally reviewed has crossed a threshold that he can no longer rationalize away. The Charlie Kirk case is not closing. It is not settling quietly into the narrative of a random tragic killing with no deeper meaning or larger context. Every single week, another layer gets pulled back. Every week, another source steps forward. Every week, another piece of the financial trail. The donor pressure operation or the suspicious post-death behavioral timeline gets documented and added to a picture that keeps getting harder to look away from. Now, someone is actively protecting the full truth of what happened on September 10th. The question that Rogan, Candace, and a rapidly growing number of people are refusing to abandon is the same one it has always been. Who exactly is doing the protecting? And how far does the chain of people with something serious to hide actually extend? Because if even a fraction of what is being alleged turns out to be documented and provable, this story doesn't just reshape what people understand about Charlie Kirk's death. It reshapes what people understand about the entire power structure that surrounded him, and that apparently decided certain things could never be allowed to reach the light. The clock is running, and the room to keep the lid on this thing is getting smaller every single day.